Welcome everyone to Depth of Field, the podcast that takes a look at the world of film and television from all sides of the camera, coming to you in association with University of Staffordshire. In this episode, we're going to be casting an eye over big screen and small screen adaptations of computer games, from Super Mario and Mortal Kombat through to Minecraft and Fallout. My name is Richard Amor Allan, and I'm joined today by gaming lecturer Jamie Nicholas from the Staffordshire Games Institute, filmmaker and gamer Arron Harrison, and filmmaker and gamer Lewis Smithard. Welcome to Depth of Field.
Thank you for having us.
Just to start with, in the past, film and television adaptations of other media has been met with mixed success. For example, books, quite often people will say, it isn't how it looks in my head. But with games, you've got a visual medium. So Jamie, how important is it for adapters of games to get the aesthetic right?
It's difficult because a lot of, and I echo your point on books, I'm thinking very keenly of the first ever adaptation of Arron. Lovely little fantasy series that I loved as a kid, and the adaptation is terrible. They cut out main character. I'm not going to go on about it because I'll get grumpy. But in terms of visuals, when we look at game visuals, over the last sort of 50 years of developing games, we've come up with very unique visual styles and motifs that people know. If you see a green pipe, you know that that's going to be Mario. And translating the exact visuals into a film format is a difficult thing to do, especially with the sort of trend of blending this kind of like real life people into those kind of scenes, like we've just seen with the Minecraft film.
I mean, I think especially if you're making like an adaptation for an iconic game, if you don't match the theme, a lot of the gaming audience is going to get annoyed, as seen by like Sonic, the adaptation for the Sonic film, and the demand to recreate Sonic because he did not look right. You can definitely annoy a lot of the audience, especially fandom spaces. They don't take it well if you don't adapt these things properly.
So Lewis, do you think that was an exercise in the power of the public, the backlash against the original design for Sonic?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess you just do your research, right? So, like, not to, yeah.
Job right.
Yeah, well, you've got a video game which has a very particular style that is ran from its very inception all the way through to the latest games. And they did away with all of that to try and chase a different visual style which doesn't match the original source material, right? So when you've got an audience that sees this massive mismatch, of course it's going to annoy them.
If I could briefly jump in and get us out of trouble with Sega, translating video characters as is into the real world is a difficult thing. It's why when you see the Minecraft film, whatever your critiques of the Minecraft film, they've done very well not to keep to the original texturing style of Minecraft, because there's a significant difference between pixels and then people. Yeah. We have more, and when what they've done is they've reduced the contrast down by meeting in the middle. Still recognisable as blocky Minecraft, but with different textures on top. I think if we're being kind to the people who made Sonic, they got caught in the trap of trying to make a beloved character more realistic and trying to match it to the real world. Yeah, and that's not an easy thing to do.
So you kind of touched on it a little bit there. That even though it is an intellectual property of a company, it's still regarded as the people's property as well. So they have definitely a sway over how it should look on the screen. Is that what you're saying?
I'd say so, yes. Yeah. My point was more along the lines of getting game visual styles into real world is difficult, but you've landed on something very interesting in which we have to consider games as these big things in people's lives. It's only like sort of, obviously there used to be this kind of conception around games as like a silly, fun thing people do, but it's not like serious or part of someone. I've grown up with games for 24 years. I have had them since I was very, very young, and they have formed significant parts of who I am. So there's some of them which are really impactful for me. You mentioned Fallout in your intro. I've got Fallout tattooed on me because that game had such a massive impact both on my career and on my personal life. That's a different podcast. If someone, let's say, well, and we know that the next Fallout series, spoilers if you haven't seen Fallout, pause and go and watch it and then come back. But in the next series, they are going to New Vegas, which is where Fallout New Vegas is set. It's my favourite game of all time. And I am both really, really excited to see how they're going to play that out, but also a little bit anxious to see what they do to some of my favourite areas. Maybe if we run into some of my favourite characters, how's that going to go? Who are we going to meet? Another thing is, and I'll get onto this maybe a bit later when we talk about interactivity as well, but I've done a lot in New Vegas. It's my New Vegas, and I'm interested to see where they take the canon New Vegas, if that makes sense.
You've kind of touched on interactivity there, and I want to talk a little bit about that, because gameplay is inherently an interactive experience. So when you're watching a film or a TV show, it's a lot more passive. You are watching it and experiencing it, you're not interacting with it. So how much of an obstacle is that for people adapting games to get the feel of it right for the audience and still keep that appeal? Arron?
I think it's incredibly difficult. There's obviously a lot of talks about Until Dawn, which is a completely narrative-based game, and it's also a butterfly effect game, so everyone has their own kind of path in that. But with the film adaptation, they've made these brand new characters, and a lot of people are kind of looking at it like, well, why don't you just make a film inspired by the game rather than calling it Until Dawn the film? Turn it into kind of something that takes place in that universe but isn't necessarily in direct correlation with the game itself. Because I think taking away from those gameplay dynamics, especially with games like Life is Strange or Until Dawn, where they are a butterfly effect, it just kind of spoils the thing. I don't think it's something that could be necessarily adapted into a film or a TV series unless it's given a lot of time and given something kind of Bandersnatch style with the way that they had the interactive kind of TV series. I think that would be a great adaptation for stuff like that. But obviously it's really difficult and really time consuming, especially for an adaptation.
Lewis?
Yeah, well, actually, there's something that just came up in my head when you were talking about that, is Left 4 Dead had an adaptation. It's called Zombieland, right? They weren't able to use the IP of Left 4 Dead because of, the curse of film adaptations of video games. But it's one of the most, I suppose you could call it somewhat audience interactive sort of films you could have in that universe they'd created. So I think they did a really good job at transferring it over, but yeah, they just didn't use the IP.
With that example, I just want to jump on that quickly. We talked about games as visuals. We talked about games as narrative experiences. Games are also a gameplay experience, and film and games have shared overlap when it comes to how we pace them and how we put them together, but they're significantly different in the way that we set them up. So if we want to make a really exciting sort of combat scene like in Left 4 Dead, there's things that we use in games that wouldn't necessarily translate well over to film, which begs the question, what are you trying to do with a film adaptation of a game? What is the point of it? How are you using the IP to advance the IP and not just replicate the experience that you can get from playing the game?
I think some games, we talked about narrative there, some games will follow a narrative and they will guide the player along a predetermined narrative relatively rigidly. And games like The Last of Us will follow that kind of narrative, and then the TV version follows along the same narrative. So when you have a show like that, where it's following the narrative so closely, does it not ruin the surprises for the gamers who are watching the series?
I think it could do, but at the same time, I think for things like The Last of Us, it's made the game more accessible to people because it's something that a lot of people have seen online, and even though they're not gamers, have wanted to get involved, but they don't like the idea of playing all those combat-style games. So the thought of having to fight a zombie yourself is a lot of effort. So putting it into a TV series has made it a massive success because the story within that game is incredible. It's really engaging. So it works well being translated onto the screen. So it's more of it will maybe spoil it, and a lot of people who have played it could be upset with certain elements and the way that they handle certain scenes. But at the same time, you're then opening up that universe to a lot of new people who couldn't necessarily play it in the first place.
And are just bad at fighting zombies in general. I can't do it.
I'm terrible. I'm a Resident Evil fan, and I can't fight zombies for the life of me.
But do you think, though, when you have big plot spoiler moments, that are already in the games, does that take away from the enjoyment of the series at all?
I don't think so, because as someone who really enjoys like books and stuff, I don't think reading the books and then watching the adaptations, I don't think it comes across as a spoiler because they are usually adapted slightly differently as well, so there's still some element of surprise in there.
It's a different experience playing something and doing things than watching somebody else do it. And there's a different feeling you get when you are the person enacting those moments and doing those things than watching them. I felt a much more visceral, emotional reaction to some of the stuff that happened in the TV version of The Last of Us than I did in the actual game when I played half of it. So it's really dependent on like how you like experience those moments.
So just picking up on something that you'd said there, though, on about people then finding the games more accessible. Do you think that successful adaptations of games lead to more people then going back and investing in those games and playing them?
I think so. I think for the case of like, now, not to sound slanderous, I'm not a fan of League of Legends. I think it's terrible gameplay. I think it's awful. But Arcane has definitely kind of brought it back into the forefront of things. So a lot of people, even if they don't necessarily stick with it, have definitely started playing it more because they've got this love for the characters now. And once you've grown this attachment to characters, then you're going to want more. You want to consume more media that involves these characters. So it kind of sells the game more, I think.
Going in another direction, but you mentioned Fallout earlier on, and obviously you've shown us the Fallout ink on the arm there. The recent Fallout TV series was, set in the Fallout world, the post-apocalyptic alternative reality Earth, but it didn't necessarily feature any characters or scenarios or locations directly lifted from any of the games. So does that give the filmmakers and the program makers more creative freedom, and does it make it more of an appealing thing for viewers to watch it, knowing that they're not tied down by a story? Lewis, do you want to take that one?
Well, if you've got to follow a particular narrative from the game, then you're going to be able to predict everything that's mapped out, because especially if you've played it. I mean, I guess there's an argument to be made between whether you are someone who's played the games before or someone who's just coming in as a new audience member. The way you'll experience those things are fundamentally going to be different. But is it going to increase the immersion you have if you have played the video games? And yeah, I suppose it will, because you're engaged, you're not quite sure what's going to happen next, so you're going to you're kind of pushed into the bracket of a passive audience by virtue of it being a different environment. So it bundles all of those groups together into one and makes it so much easier to sell to the majority of people.
I think I'll just add to that as well is Fallout, as an example. Fallout is a wonderful, wonderful thing in the fact that the Fallout games are so inconsistent. Fallout 1 and 2 are different styles to any of the ones that came afterwards. There's different narratives for all of them. The different factions change between each one. But what they always share is a sort of like a very similar style of comedy, a bit of flair, and sort of the concepts in it as well, because they play on American culture and they play on like communism versus the other one, capitalism. How did I forget that one? And as someone who played all of them, loved all of them, I wasn't looking for a Fallout game in my TV show. I was looking for the essence of Fallout. Though that shared comedy and that shared commonality between the games as an experience on the screen. However they translated it, however narratively translated it, that's fine, as long as they understood what the game was about fundamentally.
So are you the kind of gamer that does all of the side quests, or do you just stick to the main story?
I'm all side quests. I'm terrible at actually finishing and getting things done. My ADHD has translated into the virtual world, and we're all suffering for it.
Fair enough. So, Lewis, do you think you found a similar thing that basically with the whole idea of side quests and stuff, creating a world that you can see on the screen, is it just as satisfying as exploring the game?
I think it just gives you more options. You've got access to more source material to base the film or the series off, right? Every interaction you make is another element of research, right? So I think it makes it easier to translate it to the screen. Yeah.
And I think also on Arron's point earlier, it goes the other way as well. So in League of Legends, which I do play and do enjoy, and I'm sorry, in League of Legends, you get maybe most of the characters don't have a whole lot of backstory. Some of them may have like little clips on YouTube, or they'll have some narrative woven in that you can get a little glimpse of. But the style of League and the style of the game makes it very difficult to get any real narrative in there. Now with the TV series, we have a boatload of information about these characters that we can then take into the game with us and understand why that person's saying that voice line to that person, why these two factions are at war, like why the FX on that one character is green and the FX on the other characters is blue. I know that's explained in the game, but I wasn't paying attention. But now I know, because of the series.
Going back a little bit to, I'm going to say, like the mid-90s, there was a big Hollywood drive towards funding game adaptations on the big screen, and it didn't prove to be particularly financially successful. I'm thinking of films like the Bob Hoskins version of Super Mario, which I think Bob Hoskins went on record to say it was a film he kind of regretted ever doing. And it didn't make money at the box office, but it did find quite a cult following. But bearing in mind it's based on a platform game, are there any kinds of games that really do not lend themselves to being turned into films and television shows?
That's a really solid question.
I think there'd be some you struggle with. Like, I'd be impressed if someone could make a Tetris TV show or film. I think there's definitely some maybe that don't lend themselves as well as others, but I'm sure given the films that are coming out at the moment, someone can make a film out of anything, really.
I think it's more difficult to make a film than it is to make a TV series, because just going back to Fallout, you've got like 8 episodes, 8 hours of storyline, whereas something like Borderlands, you've got several games as your source and an hour and a half's worth of screen time. There's no way you can do it justice.
Yeah, it's a difficult translation. I've been sat here thinking about how to turn Tetris into a TV series. I would turn it into some kind of dating show between the blocks. That's because I play a lot of dating sims.
I was going to say, that's like another dating game.
Yeah,
kind of
I shouldn't be allowed to make it, is what we've decided. It goes back to like, what are we doing with the source material and why? What is the virtue of? I'm not saying it was bad, but what is the virtue of turning a 160-hour experience into a 1.5-hour experience?
It's got to be made by people who care about the games. So people who have actually like played these things and know all the kind of lore and the characters so that they can adapt it correctly. So like, not necessarily correctly, but in a way that reads well on a screen, because for like the likes of the Silent Hill films, they are shocking adaptations of the games. Like, the games are great and they're really popular, but then if you ask anyone who's played the game what their opinions are of the Silent Hill films, they'll say they don't exist. They're not real in my mind, because they're such bad adaptations, and you can tell they were made for the sake of making a horror film, because Resident Evil, the adaptations that they made for their films were more successful. It kind of spiraled into we can make horror films into, like, horror games into films and it'll be great, and it doesn't necessarily always translate if you don't have the passion for it.
I mean, while I was doing research for this episode, I found out that there is a film of Gran Turismo, which I'd have thought...
Is that?
Yeah, the fact that you're asking that question shows how successful that was. But again, is that kind of racing games and stuff, how does that ever adapt itself? You have to attach a storyline to it and let it go, and I think that's where the storyline is going to let it down, presumably.
Well, I guess Gran Turismo being adapted to screen, I mean, you'd want to know about characters, right? That's what you're being invited to explore when you come on to watch a film. You're watching character development, you're watching the entire environment that they are within developing over the course of that time. So taking a game about cars and then putting that onto screen doesn't make sense unless the cars have a personality, like in Cars.
It's an interesting aspect to explore of, like, again, I've been saying it over and over again because it's like the main points in my head, but you've always got to answer the question, like, why are you translating this in? My favorite adaptations of anything ever are adaptations of anything into the Lego games. Like, we're going the other way, but anything into the Lego games. And you can always tell there's a clear reason, because with Lego, they add in this like level of comedy. It's not just everything's made of Lego. There's the Lego comedy. It brings it down to like a more, sometimes like more child-friendly approach. So you've got to ask the same question when you're taking a video game, you're taking its mechanics, you're taking its narrative, and translating it into the, like, often like, I keep real world film or like real characters. What are you doing with that? And interesting, like with the Minecraft film coming out, one of the things that I think that they may not have expected was what they did with their target audience, or what their target audience was going to end up being. Because they made the Minecraft film, and it was very much aimed as like almost like a kids film. But Minecraft has been played for like the last 10, 15 years by people like me, who are now in their 20s, nearing their 30s, which was really upsetting. And like, that's the people who would be kind of interested in seeing that kind of thing. And then also they threw Jack Black in there, who has been a household name for adults for the last 20 odd years. So what were you aiming for there would be my question. I still haven't seen it.
I have.
Is it good?
As someone who's watched the film and played the game, even though it's an open world game where you can do whatever you want, right, there is still subtle progressions to be made, right? There is a direction for you to go, right? None of which was explored in the film. So I think, again, it's like, if you're going to be making a film of a game, you should do your research on it and look at the audience that's going to receive it, like you've been talking about. Because otherwise, if you're just making it to accumulate cash, it probably won't work. But if you're doing it to gift an audience something extra, they'll want to pay to see it.
And that brings up an interesting point, because you started talking about mechanics, which I'm sorry, but it's my PhD area. And one of the key things about mechanics is, as a thought process or a thought exercise, imagine yourself watching somebody go through the mechanics of Minecraft, like going and killing a cow and getting leather to make leather armor, and then going and digging a hole and finding iron to make iron armor, and going to find diamonds and then making that. How bored are you already? Because when you're not
thinking about the mechanics specifically,
okay.
I was thinking about the progression of you going through the environment.
Okay.
So, you know, you've got, you start with nothing, you then progress to, you know, a bigger thing, you find something out, and then you use that to create something else.
Like the full gameplay loop?
Yeah, the full gameplay loop. You know, and it all builds up to you killing the final boss. But that, to me, as a filmmaker, is an underdog story, right? You're starting with nothing, it's rags to riches. That's what the film kind of should have been. And you've got a lot of backstory as well that was within the community with things like Herobrine, right? Which was not explored or not even hinted to. So you've got basically all of this source material that was kind of just like, oh yeah, that's pretty, let's put that over there. Right, what are we making? You know?
It's a way more interesting take than what I was on about. So.
Because they could have gone with like, kind of like when you watch films like Jumanji, where you have these characters that play these games and then they end up in these games themselves. I think it could have been interesting to go through it, like you said, in like a player style, would have probably been a better take on it.
So a little bit of first person in there, like when they made Doom with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and they had the whole, at the time, groundbreaking first person experience, which for gamers was fantastic, but for regular cinema viewers was actually quite nauseating, and a lot of people saying that the camera movement made them feel sick. So that's something as well which brings us on to this idea of game adaptations, where the target isn't necessarily the gamers, because obviously the film and TV audience is actually a lot wider. So there is that appeal there of watching something that needs to stand alone. We've talked earlier on about Fallout. Now, when I watch Fallout at home, I'm a big fan of Fallout 4, so I'm sitting on the edge of my seat, but my wife has never played the game. She still found it entertaining. She still enjoyed it. And things like, we watched the Angry Birds movie, which I avoided for ages thinking this is going to be rubbish. How can they make a film based on a platform game like that? And I watched it and I was disappointed with myself at how much I actually enjoyed it. And it was really kind of good fun. So there is a lot to be said, I think, for aiming at a more commercial audience, but making your product accessible to people outside of gaming. That's got to be the key when you're saying about what the makers are aiming for, surely.
We made the point earlier of getting the same kind of experience from a game as the core part of making a film about the game. One of the things that came up in Fallout was this, the experience of going into a new vault, finding out what weird stuff is going on in there, and then essentially completing that side quest. And that happens with, I think it's a very famous actor who was just a Cyclops because of mutations or something like that. And that one episode where it's set all in the vault, you're figuring out the weird stuff that goes on in that vault, some zany stuff happens and then you leave. They've made a side quest, a classic Fallout side quest, into a part of the film, into a part of the series, and it works. And it's the same kind of experience that I experienced when I first went into one of the vaults in New Vegas. It's a good translation. I like that they did that.
So side quests as part of the narrative.
Yes.
Yeah. Finally, though, what games do you think would make for great adaptations that they haven't made yet? Jamie.
Oh, give me a second, because I'm opening like steam in my head. Any thoughts?
I've got two I'd be interested to see. The first one would be The Sims, because there's a lot of talk on that, because for people who don't necessarily play Sims hardcore, I guess is the way to say it, there's so much lore to the characters and backstories and missing people and aliens and stuff, and I think it could make for a really like comedic like film or show or something. Like, I think it would be really funny, and I think a lot of the people who enjoy the franchise, like the Sims like kind of franchise, would enjoy a film adaptation, and I think it could be easy to draw people in as well, with it being such a like household kind of name. Like, everyone kind of knows what the Sims is, and like the little green diamond above people's heads and stuff. But the other one, which would be a lot more difficult, would be something like Detroit Become Human, because obviously it is once again like a butterfly effect kind of game. So you'd have to kind of pick a narrative, but I think it has such a strong overarching kind of story, it could make for an incredible adaptation if it was done correctly, though.
Lewis?
Franbo, all the way. It's a story about a young girl struggling with, I can't remember what it was, some mental condition? Yeah, and how her young brain is trying to figure out she's just trying to find a cat called Mr. Midnight, but it shows how warped that can become, and how all the things that you just consider like just kids' words or stuff like that. Like, she was explaining at one point, I don't know how graphic I can go on this. So there's a bit where, I guess I could censor it, she's talking about seeing blood or whatever, and she describes it as red milk, right? So it shows that she already doesn't have an understanding of actual reality. So to have that entwined with an actual mental condition that already hinders that would be amazing to explore. Not in like a film, but like a series, so you can properly explore it.
I'd want to go with Dragon Age, but with the specific caveat that I get to be in the casting room. I've got a dream cast going in my head of classically trained British actors that I think would go excellently into like a Dragon Age kind of Fallout-esque series. That would go really well.
I think classically trained British actors, you can't go wrong.
Yes.
In there. I think for me, on one level, I'd like to see a series of Death Stranding and a short film based on Stray, just to see if someone could do it. Well, that brings us to the end of this edition of Depth of Field. Our thanks go to our panel, Jamie Nicholas, Arron Harrison, and Lewis Smithard, and of course to you for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it. Catch you on the next one.